My name is Helen. I'm 67 years old, and it took me nearly a lifetime to realize that love isn't supposed to hurt. If you're drawn to real stories, painful ones that also speak of courage and new beginnings, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because every week you'll hear a story that might sound a lot like yours, like mine was, like mine still is. I was married for over 40 years to a man who made me cry quietly in the bathroom. I used to tell myself it was just a phase, that he was stressed, that maybe it was my fault. But time passed, and the yelling became routine. The bruises stopped being accidental, and the loneliness, that one settled in, even with him right beside me. At 63, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself. I didn't see an old woman. I saw a woman in pieces, and I knew that if I didn't leave, there'd be nothing left of me. That's when I began planning my escape, alone, in silence, without warning. Today I live a simple life, but it's mine. I have a small apartment, some plants on the balcony, and a dog that waits for me at the door every day. And then the most unexpected thing happened. I met someone, a kind man, mature, who respects my quiet and admires my scars. Because he understands, they tell a story. This is my story. And if you want to hear it, take a deep breath and come with me. Because sometimes, true love only shows up after we learn to love ourselves first. I used to wake up before him. It wasn't insomnia. It was fear. The sound of Carl's footsteps in the hallway made my body shrink, even if he was just going to the bathroom. Some mornings were calm, others weren't. A glass knocked over, a plate thrown at the wall. We never knew what kind of mood he'd bring, and I walked on eggshells like I was living in a minefield. Carl was well liked by everyone else. Hardworking, helpful, a steady presence at church. When he smiled in public, no one imagined what happened inside our home. The neighbors called him a good husband, and I smiled back, swallowing my truth. Because what he did to me didn't leave visible bruises, but it broke me from the inside. One cut a day, one humiliation a week. The kids grew up and left early. They thought their dad and I were just different. They didn't see the slammed doors, the heavy silences, the nights I slept on the couch. Carl was smart. He knew how to hide it. When he shouted, he shut the windows. When he shoved me, he apologized right after. And I believed him. Because I wanted to. Because I thought I was too old to start over. Time passed without me noticing. The Helen who used to dance was gone. So was the one who dreamed. All that was left was the one who survived. The one who knew the exact moment to stay quiet. Who learned to say it's fine when everything was wrong. Who got used to feeling lonely even with someone beside her. I had lived like that for 42 years, and I thought I'd die like that too. But that night, he threw the plate on the floor and told me to remake dinner. I didn't cry. I didn't apologize. I just looked at the broken pieces on the ground and thought, I can't do this anymore. For the first time, it wasn't sadness. It was anger. Not at him, at me. At the Helen who always gave in, who never fought back, who forgot what it felt like to breathe without fear. I wanted out. I needed out. And I started to plan. I waited until he fell asleep and snuck onto the computer. I typed help for women in abusive relationships, and a whole world opened up. I wrote down addresses, phone numbers, names of shelters. I copied it all onto a piece of paper and hid it inside the closet. My heart was racing, like I was committing a crime. But for the first time in decades, I felt hope. It took me 6 months to get out. Every step was quiet, careful, dangerous. I had to wait for the right moments. I started gathering documents, hiding money, going to the bank with different excuses. Every time Carl left the house, I made one small move, and slowly, inch by inch, I carved out a possible escape. Nothing was easy, but I didn't stop. The day I left, the sky was overcast. Carl had a doctor's appointment, and I knew exactly how long he'd be gone. I grabbed the bag I had packed in secret and walked out. A cab was already waiting, booked under a fake name. I went to the address the social worker had given me. When the door shut behind me, I collapsed. For the first time in 40 years, I felt free. The room was simple, a single bed, a small closet. But in that place, I saw something my house had never given me: safety. During those first few days, I barely spoke. I hardly slept, cried constantly. The shelter coordinator told me it was all part of the process. I felt guilty, out of place, lost. But little by little, I started to realize that leaving was just the first step. I had to rebuild myself. I joined group talks and met other women. Some had stories worse than mine. Others were just like mine. It was like looking into a mirror. I started telling my story, slowly, at first with shame, then with pain, until one day I spoke without shaking. Helen, 63 years old, married for over 40 years to a man who never loved me. But I made it through. With their help, I got a small, subsidized apartment. 1 bedroom, a kitchen-living combo, and a narrow balcony with no view. But when I stepped inside holding that key, I felt like I belonged to myself again. I bought a red kettle, a flowered dish towel, 2 crooked little plants, and I hung up a quote I found in a shelter pamphlet: "There's still time." And I believed it. That's where I started living again. No luxuries, no big plans, just the basics. I slept without hearing yelling, had hot coffee while looking at my plants, talked to the neighbor's dog, and one day I went to the community center to check out free classes. I picked gardening, not knowing why. Maybe to learn how to care for something. Maybe to learn how to care for myself. And that's where I met Frank. Instead of repeating the moment I met Frank, I want to tell you what surprised me most about him: his patience. He never rushed me, never acted like he was owed anything. Sometimes we'd go an entire afternoon barely speaking, and that was okay. He made silence feel safe, not heavy like it used to feel with Carl. Just peaceful, like I didn't need to explain myself to be seen. Frank never told me how to be or who I used to be. He simply listened, and when I couldn't talk, he waited. One day I asked him why he was so calm all the time. He said, "Because I've already learned that love isn't about fixing. It's about walking side by side," and I wrote that in my heart. Because I had never walked beside anyone. I'd always walked behind, or alone. The more I was with him, the more I noticed how he respected every version of me. The quiet one, the sad one, the laughing one, even the distant one. I didn't have to be cheerful to be loved. I didn't have to pretend I was okay. With Frank, I could show up as I was, and that was enough. For someone who had spent decades hiding, that freedom was everything. He once told me that lavender had always reminded him of his wife's strength, and now it reminded him of mine. I smiled and said, "I'm still learning how to believe in that." He replied, "That's okay. You don't need to believe in it all at once. I'll believe it for both of us until you can." And that day, something inside me softened. We started planting things together, little by little. Seeds, herbs, new flowers. It was symbolic, rebuilding, nurturing, trusting the seasons. And I realized that I wasn't just falling in love with Frank. I was falling in love with life again, slowly, patiently, in my own time. And maybe that's how real love grows. We had coffee together in the center's cafe. Then we started meeting at the bakery. Frank was calm, patient. When he learned part of my story, he didn't ask questions. He just said he was sorry and stayed. That was enough. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from words. It comes from presence. The way someone looks at you without judgment, like you're still whole. Over time, I began to trust him. He talked about his life with lightness, left space for me to speak if I wanted to. And one day I did. I talked about fear, loneliness, shame. He listened to every word, eyes steady, silence full of care. Then he held my hand, warm fingers, steady touch. And in that single gesture, there was more tenderness than in all my years of marriage. Frank gave me a lavender cutting. "For your balcony," he said. I cried. It was just a plant, but it was the first gift I'd received in years. I planted it carefully, like it was a new piece of me. Every morning I'd water it, watching the leaves grow, and I understood. It was possible to start over, slowly, in my own time. And now, with someone by my side, there were no promises, no vows, just presence. Frank came over on Sundays, brought fresh bread, and listened to music with me. He told silly stories and laughed out loud. I still carried fear, yes, but with him, it wasn't a prison. It was just a memory of who I used to be. Because today, with him, I was someone else. Older, more scarred, but whole, for the first time. Frank never asked about the past. When I spoke, he listened. When I stayed quiet, he respected it. Sometimes we sat for hours on the balcony, watching the evening fade. It was a different kind of silence than what I lived with Carl. Not the silence of fear, the silence of peace. The kind you feel when you finally don't have to pretend everything's fine, because it actually is. That lightness scared me. I wasn't used to it. One day, when he tried to hug me goodbye, I flinched without meaning to. I saw the sadness in his eyes. I apologized. He smiled and said, "It's okay, Helen. We'll go at your pace." That broke me, because that was exactly what I needed. Time, respect, a safe space to be who I am. I started to look forward to Sundays. Frank brought pastries, fresh coffee, and sometimes flowers, not store-bought, from his own garden. One time he gave me a sprig of rosemary. "Plant it next to the lavender," he said. I didn't know it then, but rosemary keeps pests away. I smiled and thought, maybe that's what I needed, protection. He seemed to understand my silences better than any therapist ever could. I found myself smiling again, laughing out loud, playing music in the living room, cooking for pleasure, dressing up with care, even if I wasn't going anywhere, not to please anyone, just because I wanted to feel beautiful. Helen was coming back, slowly, but surely, and every time Frank said my name with tenderness, I remembered I wasn't born to be hurt. I was born to live, to love, and to be loved in return. My oldest daughter came to visit. She was surprised by the apartment, the plants, my lighter face. She asked about Carl, about what happened. I didn't say much. She cried, said she felt guilty for never seeing it. I told her she couldn't have known. That monsters sometimes wear masks, even within the family, and that now, I was okay. As she left, she hugged me and said, "You look happy, Mom." And I answered, without hesitation, for the first time, I am. In that moment, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a weight I'd carried for years, for decades, a weight that said I had to endure, to smile while bleeding. But now, I didn't carry it anymore, because there was a Frank, and there was a Helen being reborn. Frank invited me to see his home. I hesitated. He noticed, said it was just a visit, no rush. He told me he'd lived alone since his wife passed, that he hadn't brought anyone there in years, that he wanted, yes, to show me the garden he cared for so lovingly. I thought about it, took a deep breath, and said yes, because something inside me wanted to take that step. The house was simple and warm. It smelled like wood, coffee, and leaves. The windows had soft curtains. There were books, old photos, blankets on the armchairs, and the garden. It was beautiful. Lavender, rosemary, daisies, mint, a patch of peace. He showed me every corner with pride, and I listened, touching the plants, feeling the breeze. It was a place where pain didn't enter, and I allowed myself to be there. We had tea on the porch. We talked about the future without making plans. He said if I wanted, I could bring my plants there someday, that the garden had room. I laughed and said lavender is picky. He replied, and so are you allowed to be. Those words struck something deep in me, because for the first time, someone reminded me that I was allowed to be demanding, that I deserved to be. I stayed until it got dark. When he walked me to the gate, he didn't try to kiss me. He just touched my face gently and said, "Come back whenever you want." And in that touch, there was more truth than in all the kisses I'd received in my youth, because it was affection without pressure, care without ownership. It was love in its purest form, and it made me walk home smiling to myself. That night, I dreamed of a backyard full of flowers and a table set for two. I woke up wanting to plant more, to paint the walls, to decorate life. I started redoing my little home with small touches, a new pillow, a blue curtain, an empty picture frame, waiting for a photo of us. It felt like I was finally choosing to live, not just exist. I didn't tell Frank about the dream, but he showed up the next Sunday with a rocking chair. "For your little corner on the balcony," he said. The chair was secondhand, but sturdy. And when I sat in it, looking out at the afternoon sun, I was sure life was giving me a second chance. And this time, I wasn't going to waste it. Because now, I knew what I deserved. I decided to open an old drawer. Inside were old letters, documents, photos from my time with Carl. My stomach tightened. Looking at that past hurt, but I needed to face it. I burned what still hurt me, kept only what belonged to my kids. I cleaned out that drawer like someone scrubbing their soul, because sometimes, to move forward, you have to empty what holds you back. I spoke to the social worker and told her about Frank. She smiled but reminded me, "Take it slow. You deserve to live this, but don't forget what you've been through." I agreed. I didn't want to live for anyone else anymore, but I also didn't want to shut myself off from the possibility of real love. A love that doesn't hurt, doesn't demand. A love like Frank's, simple, mature, present. One afternoon, he invited me to dinner. He made spaghetti and apple pie. We sat in the yard with candles and soft music. I was nervous. He noticed. He said the dinner wasn't to win me over. It was to thank me for being there. I cried, and he held my hand and said, "You're free, Helen. You can leave anytime you want, but I'd love for you to stay." I kissed Frank that night. It was a tender kiss, unhurried, the kind of kiss that comes from someone who respects and waits. I slept next to him, for the first time, without being afraid to breathe too loud, to move in bed, to be myself. I woke up to the smell of coffee, the sound of birds, and a peace I hadn't felt in years. And in that moment, I understood it wasn't too late. It's never too late. I came home with messy hair and a light heart. The neighbors noticed my smile. One of them said, "You look different, Helen." And I answered, "I'm alive." because that's what it was. I was alive, whole, still afraid, yes, still full of scars, but finally in control of my story. And that story was finally starting to feel beautiful. That week, I planted carnations, flowers that grow strong even in hard soil, and I thought, that's me. I was stepped on, neglected, forgotten. But now I bloom, and as long as it's up to me, I'll never wilt again. I started going to Frank's house more often. There was no pressure, no expectations. Sometimes we'd spend the afternoon reading in the garden. Other times, we'd just walk around the neighborhood, watching the simple lives of the neighbors. It was a kind of love unlike anything I'd ever known. No urgency, no control. Frank didn't want to change me. He just wanted to be with me, exactly as I was. Even so, there were hard days. Days I'd wake up afraid for no reason. When the sound of a door slamming made me flinch. When I felt guilty for being happy. The center therapist explained that trauma runs deep. It doesn't vanish just because I'm safe now. And I cried. Because I wanted to be light, whole, ready. But I was still carrying rubble. Frank never complained. When he noticed my restlessness, he'd change the subject, make tea, play soft music. He let me cry, but also knew how to make me laugh. One day, while we were watering the plants, he said, "You don't have to rush to be happy. You just have to allow it." And I wrote that on my heart, because for the first time, someone wasn't pushing me. He was holding space for me. We went to a street fair together. He bought candy, I picked out a blue scarf. We laughed with the musicians, took photos at a little photo booth. Someone asked if we were married. I froze, but Frank just smiled and said, "We're companions." That touched me, because it wasn't about paperwork or rings. It was about presence, care, and companionship. And that I had. On the way home, he offered me a spare key to his house. "This isn't pressure, Helen. It's just so you know there's a place here if you want it." I cried. I didn't accept it right away. I needed time. But just hearing those words, something inside me opened. For decades, a key had symbolized Carl's control. Now, it meant choice, freedom, and that hurt, in a good way. That night, I slept with the key under my pillow. Not as a decision, but as a symbol, like practicing a step before walking. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew that for the first time, I wasn't running away from anything. I was walking toward myself, and that was everything. Some neighbors started talking. "You seem different, Helen," they'd say. Others would quietly ask if I was seeing someone. I'd smile and change the subject. Part of me still feared judgment, especially from those who knew Carl, as if I had to wear eternal mourning for a marriage that only ever hurt me. But in time I realized that wasn't my burden to carry. One afternoon, I ran into an old acquaintance from church. She spoke about Carl with pity. He was always such a good husband. I swallowed hard but said, "Not everything is as it seems." She went silent, and I walked away, heart pounding. It was the first time I'd said it out loud without apologizing, and it gave me strength, because I didn't have to hide the truth anymore. I talked to my kids. I told them carefully what I'd lived through. They cried. They felt guilty. Said they should have noticed. I told them no. Carl was good at hiding things. It wasn't their fault. And now I was okay. And that Frank was a good man. It took time for them to accept it. But little by little, they listened more gently and began to understand that I was blooming, not betraying anyone. Frank met my oldest daughter. We had dinner at home. She was polite, observant. Later she told me, "He seems like a good man. And you seem lighter." That moved me. because it wasn't about approval. It was about noticing the change. And she had. I was different, more at ease, more serene, more in control of my life. And it was impossible to deny that Frank had something to do with it. I started getting more involved in activities at the center. I went back to playing piano, even with stiff fingers. I gave a cooking class, joined a book club, and I felt alive, useful, connected, like the world had room for me again. Because it does, and because I, despite everything, still have so much to offer. And for the first time in decades, I believed that. Frank looked at me with pride, said my energy was beautiful, that I made people feel good, and that made me feel good too. It wasn't just him loving me, it was him helping me love myself again, and that was rare, precious, true. It was the kind of love that doesn't suffocate, doesn't cling, doesn't shout. It just stays and cares and lasts. In the fall, we took a short trip to a nearby town, just a weekend, my first getaway in years. In the car, we listened to old songs. Frank sang off key, and I laughed. That laugh was something new, pure and light. I no longer looked around in fear. I was with someone who made me feel safe, and that's priceless. We stayed at a small wooden inn that smelled like cake and flowers at the entrance. We walked down cobblestone streets, had hot chocolate, visited the craft market. Frank bought me a scarf, said it looked like me, and it did. Blue, subtle, beautiful, just like how I felt beside him. I didn't need to hide or change myself. I just had to be. And that was enough. We slept in separate beds, just like he suggested. So you can sleep well, without fear, he said. And I did. Slept like I hadn't in years. The sound of rain on the roof, the weight of the blanket, his breathing in the next room. It was all so simple, and yet so big, because it reminded me that affection lives in the small things too. And sleeping in peace is one of the greatest luxuries anyone can have. On Sunday, before we left, he gave me an envelope. Inside was a picture of us from the market and a note that said, "Seeing you happy is my favorite thing." I cried, and he held me gently. There was no promise, no request, just tenderness, and a presence that said, without words, that he'd be there, even while I was still learning to trust. We came back with light bags and full hearts. I knew I still had steps to take, wounds to heal. But I also knew Frank wasn't trying to fix anything. He just wanted to walk with me, at my pace, on my path, and that was more than I ever imagined I'd have, more than I thought I deserved. But now, I knew. I did deserve it. When we got back home, I put our photo in a new frame. Next to it, I wrote the date of the trip, not to remember the place, but to mark the time when finally I started living. For real, no masks, no fear, with love, and with the whole Helen back again. Over time, I started spending weekends at Frank's place. He'd get the room ready for me, leave flowers by the bed, make tea before we went to sleep. It was all so different from what I lived through for years that it sometimes felt like a dream. I'd wake up startled, thinking Carl was nearby. But Frank would just gently pull me close and say, "You're safe." And I believed him. One night, I had a nightmare. I cried in my sleep, woke up gasping. Frank didn't ask a bunch of questions. He just sat beside me, gave me water, and held my hand until I fell back asleep. The next morning, he made pancakes and played my favorite song. He said some ghosts take time to leave, but that he'd stay until they were gone. And I cried, out of gratitude. I went back to therapy, now on my own terms. I wanted to understand why I put up with so much for so long. The therapist said women like me are taught early on to endure, that we confuse love with resistance, that we think being strong means never saying enough. And it made me reflect. Because I was strong, yes. But now, my strength came from choosing myself, not from erasing who I was. Frank supported me in everything. He didn't interfere, didn't lead, didn't impose. He just said, "Be light, Helen. You have that right." And that fed me more than any meal, because no one had ever told me that before. I used to think lightness was for lucky women, for the happy ones. But now I was learning that lightness can be earned, that we can learn it, that we deserve it. I started writing in colorful notebooks, not like a diary, more like letters to myself. I wrote about what I felt, what I endured, what still hurt, and it healed me. Every word I wrote was a wound I cleaned. Every memory I faced was a step forward. And slowly, I saw it. Helen wasn't just a survivor. She was a whole woman, with a past, a present, and a future. And the future, by the way, felt less scary now. With Frank by my side, with my kids respecting me, with neighbors who smiled and asked about my plants, I was part of something, again. Without fear, without shame, without guilt. I existed. And that, after everything, felt like a miracle. At the end of November, Frank asked me to spend Christmas with him. Just the two of us, he said. Simple food and lots of music. I hesitated. I still felt the weight of family, of tradition. My kids would be with their in-laws, so why not? I said yes. And we spent weeks planning together. We made a list of dishes, decorated the yard, bought lights for the porch. On Christmas Eve, he built a fire in the backyard. We roasted marshmallows and played old songs. He danced awkwardly, and I laughed. It was a Christmas with no gifts, no fancy dinner, no chaos. And it was the best one of my life. Because there was real love. A love that didn't try too hard. That just was. Like the smell of wet earth. Like the quiet between songs. At midnight, he gave me an envelope. Inside was a note. You showed me that love is still possible. Thank you for existing. And with it, a necklace with a small silver lavender pendant. My hands trembled as I held it, not because of its value, but its meaning. Lavender was our first exchange, the plant of new beginnings. And now it was here, around my neck, like a promise of care. I didn't know what to give him. But I made something special. In the backyard, I planted 3 new flowers with signs marking our dates. Our first conversation, our first coffee, our first kiss. He got emotional, said he'd never received such a beautiful gift. And I realized that true love lives in the little things, in gestures, in what only someone who sees with their heart can notice. That night, we slept wrapped in each other's arms. For the first time, without fear, without old thoughts, without bad memories. Just the two of us, breathing together, listening to the wind outside and the rhythm of our hearts. It was Christmas, and it felt like the whole world had gone quiet just to give us space. A space of peace, of truth, of everything I'd always dreamed of but never thought I'd have. I woke up before him, made coffee, played his favorite music, and waited with a smile on my face. When he walked into the kitchen, eyes still puffy from sleep, he said, "I never thought Christmas could feel this light." And I said, "Me neither. But now that we've lived it, I don't want anything else. Just this. Simple. Ours." The new year started with flowers. Frank planted sunflowers. He said he wanted the garden to smile with the sun. I kept tending to my lavender and rosemary. The backyard became our little refuge, a piece of our story growing in the earth. Neighbors would stop by to compliment it. They said something felt different there. And it did. It was quiet love, the kind that doesn't shout but fills everything around it. We went out more, laughed more, talked without hurry. Sometimes we'd go to the movies. Other times, we'd just walk hand in hand. Frank met my grandkids. He brought them toys, sat on the floor, listened to their stories. My daughter watched him with warmth. One day she told me, "He's the grandfather I wish I'd had." I smiled, because in a way, we were all healing together. One Sunday, he took me to a scenic overlook. The view was beautiful, and the wind was cold. He pulled a simple silver ring with a light blue stone from his pocket. "I don't want to hold you down, Helen. I just want to remind you that you're loved." I cried. I didn't know what to say, but I accepted it. Not as an engagement ring, but as a symbol of everything we'd built. A free bond, strong, without chains. We drove home in silence, holding hands, eyes teary. We didn't talk about marriage. We didn't have to. We were already what we wanted to be: companions, friends, late-in-life lovers. Nothing more was needed, just to keep walking together day by day. And that's what we did, gently, respectfully, with a kind of tenderness I had never known before. I sent a message to my kids telling them about the ring. Their responses were full of emotion. "You deserve it, Mom. I'm happy for you. I want to get to know Frank better." It felt like they too understood that the past was behind us now, and that from here on, it was time for love, for warmth, for seeing their mother finally loved the way she had always deserved. That night, I sat alone on the porch. I looked up at the starry sky and placed my hand over my heart. It beat calm and steady, as if saying, "You're home," because that's what it was. The home I'd been searching for all those years wasn't a house. It was the peace now living inside me. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a support group for older women. The therapist had recommended me. I hesitated. I said I didn't have anything special to share, but she insisted. "You're living proof that it's never too late." I accepted, scared, but I went. And that day, as I told my story, something shifted inside me. It was the first time I said everything out loud. I spoke about the yelling, the silence, the pain, but I also spoke about courage, about starting over, about Frank. I looked into the eyes of women who reminded me of myself not long ago. Some cried, others smiled. At the end, they hugged me. They said I gave them hope. I left that room with a light heart, and I realized that my pain, now transformed, could help others break free too. Frank was waiting outside with a bouquet of daisies. "How did it go?" I told him. He hugged me tight, said he was proud of me, that my voice mattered, that my story needed to be heard. And in that embrace, I knew I'd never be alone again, that the man who showed up quietly was now my safe harbor, my home, my kind of love. I got involved in community projects, helped at local fairs, supported women at risk, taught cooking workshops, and every time someone thanked me, I thanked them twice as much. Because giving meaning to pain is what saves us. It's what turns scars into lessons. And I truly wanted to be a bridge so other women could cross their own abysses. I started writing short stories, simple accounts, real stories of women who began again after 60. I sent them to a local newspaper, and they agreed to publish. I received letters, phone calls, invitations. My name started to get around, and I'd laugh to myself, remembering the Helen who used to hide from everything. Now she was seen, heard, and above all, respected. Frank said I was light, and I said he was ground, because without him, maybe I wouldn't have believed in myself this much. But he always made sure to remind me, "The strength is yours, Helen." I was just nearby, and that was love. A love that doesn't take over, that doesn't claim. A love that sees you and holds you up. And I finally knew what that meant. For my 70th birthday, Frank planned a surprise. He took me to the backyard for dinner. Candles lit, table set, music playing in the background. A friend of his did the cooking. There were photos of us hanging on a string with colorful clips. And when I sat down, he made a toast, said that loving me had been his greatest adventure. And I cried, not from pain, from gratitude. Some friends came, neighbors, my daughter and grandkids. They sang happy birthday, gave me hugs. One of them said, "I've never seen Grandma this happy." And I laughed, because it was true. I'd never felt so whole, so in tune with myself, so surrounded by love. It felt like every broken piece of me had come back into place. And I made myself a promise. Never again would I let anyone break me. Frank handed me an envelope with plane tickets. "I want to take you to see the ocean." I laughed. I'd never been to the beach. I used to think it was too late. But he said, "To love, to dream, to start over. It's never too late." I said yes, again, nervous, butterflies in my stomach. But I said yes, because now I no longer turned away from what was good for me. I allowed it, and that was new and beautiful. We went 2 weeks later, feet in the sand, salt in our hair, laughter in the wind. Frank taught me how to float, took me to watch the sunset, bought a seashell and wrote my name on it. "So you remember the world belongs to you too." I kept it safe, like someone holding on to a piece of a miracle, because that's what it was. Me on the beach, laughing like a girl. It was a miracle. It was life starting over. On our last night, we wrote our wishes on pieces of paper and buried them in the sand. He asked for health. I asked for courage, because love was already certain. Life was already here. But courage, that one needs to be renewed every day. And I wanted to stay brave, to love, to live, to never let fear take the lead again. Not ever. We came back sun-kissed and full-hearted. The neighbors noticed. "That couple is glowing," they said. And we were. Not because of magic, but because after so much darkness, we'd learned to recognize the light and to protect it. Because now, it was sacred. The following fall, Frank got sick. A persistent cough, fatigue, tests. They found a lung condition. Nothing serious at first, but it needed attention. I went into alert mode. I cared for him with tenderness, patience, devotion, just like he'd done for me so many times. But I'll admit it, fear crept back in. The shadow of loss lingered, and I trembled, because loving him also meant fearing losing him. Frank, though, stayed calm. "If it's my time, I'll go happy," he'd say. "But I think we still have time." And I wanted to believe that. I prayed, cooked light meals, sat by his side during tests, took notes on his meds, read out loud on the hard days. And every time he opened his eyes and smiled, I knew it doesn't matter how much time we have. What matters is what we do with it. The doctors adjusted his treatment. He improved slowly. We returned to short walks, quiet afternoons on the porch, old songs playing in the background. He said I was his best medicine. I said he was my healing. The illness changed our routine, but not our bond. If there was lightness before, now there was depth. If there had been passion, now there was surrender. And that was love in its purest form. One Sunday, he called me to the garden. Sitting under the arbor, he said, "If one day I'm no longer here, I want you to keep going. Live for me, for you, for everything we built." I couldn't respond. I just cried and held him, because even then, fragile, he was thinking of me, of protecting me, of reminding me that real love doesn't die. It stays. It holds. Over time, he started cooking again, planting, smiling more, not like before, but enough to give me peace. And I learned to live with more presence, to stop saving the nice dishes for special occasions, to stop leaving words for later. Because life, I learned, doesn't wait. And I wanted him to know every single day how deeply he was loved. That season, the lavender bloomed more than ever. The garden was beautiful, alive, just like us. And I gave thanks to the universe, to life, to myself, for having the courage, for staying, for starting over, because everything that came after the pain was worth every step. Time went on. The wrinkles deepened, the hair turned whiter. But life became lighter. Frank stabilized with the right care. There were still checkups, medications, limits, but there were also laughs, twilight dinners, hands held on the garden bench. We learned to savor the present with sweetness, to be thankful for each morning we woke up side by side. We started writing letters to each other, not out of fear of goodbye, but from the desire to leave something beautiful behind. Simple things, memories, feelings, snapshots of our story. We kept them in a wooden box. It felt like a shelter from time itself, something to hold on to. Because what we had built was so real, so rare, it deserved to be preserved with care. One afternoon, Frank took me back to the same scenic overlook where he'd given me the ring. We sat in silence. He said, "If one day I can't speak anymore, read my letters. I'll be in them." And I answered, "If one day I can't smile, remember the way I'm looking at you now." We stayed like that, hands intertwined, eyes on the horizon. The world rushed below us. But there, between us, everything was still. I started teaching piano at the community center, small classes, women like me, shaky fingers but curious eyes. I discovered that teaching also heals. Watching those women play their first notes moved me, because each one of them, like me, had started over from somewhere. And now they were making music, even with hands marked by time. Frank would come pick me up after class, sometimes with flowers, other times just a smile. But every time he'd say, "You were glowing today," and I believed him, because he truly saw me, like no one ever had. And I saw him too, beyond the aches, the wrinkles, the years. I saw his calm heart, his steady, gentle soul, and I felt like the luckiest woman for having found that kind of love. On the last night of summer, we danced in the living room. No music, just the memory of an old melody. He twirled me slowly, gently, then whispered, "I'm so glad we found each other." I smiled, rested my head on his chest, and thought, yes, so glad. Because even after everything, I got to live the most beautiful kind of love, and it started inside me. Today I'm 72, and I look in the mirror with pride. The lines on my face tell my story. I don't hide anymore. I don't apologize for existing. I'm Helen, survivor, woman, lover, teacher, partner. I was broken, but I put myself back together. And now, with every piece in its place, I can say, I'm whole. Frank is still with me, sitting in the rocking chair next to mine. Sometimes we talk. Other times, we just watch the lavender. Time doesn't scare us anymore, because what we've lived through is already bigger than anything else. And if tomorrow never comes, we'll know we made the most of it, that we lived with courage, that we loved each other truthfully. I never stayed quiet in the face of violence again. Today, when I hear a story like mine, I reach out. I say, you can leave. You can start over. Because if I could do it, after more than 40 years of pain, any woman can. It's not easy, but it's possible. And the life waiting on the other side of pain is so much more beautiful than they say. I have grandkids who hug me tight, children who come to me for advice, friends who admire my strength, and a man by my side who never tried to save me. He just walked with me, because I saved myself, with fear, with pain, with stumbles. But I saved myself, and that's something no one can take from me. Sometimes I sit in the garden and close my eyes. I listen to the wind, the birds, the soft rustle of the leaves, and I think about everything I've lived. I don't regret loving. I regret taking so long to understand what real love was, but I give thanks every day for having understood in time. Because yes, I was a victim, but today, I'm free, I'm loved, and above all, I'm happy.